wonderful to see all the people that are on. And I want to thank you for being here today. And especially I want to thank Nan Buzzard, because for her it's almost midnight given our age and our time in Geneva. Is that where you are right now?
Well,
And
it's true I'm old, and it's true I'm in Geneva, but it's only 9 p.m.
it's okay. I think I'm even more ancient than you. No, I'm not. I'm teasing. But what I was going to say, which is really sort of my personal experience with Nan. When I was an international delegate working overseas, one of the books that I was told that I had to look at was called the Spheres Project, which gives an overview of how to set up during a master disaster or a war, and how you set up all the logistics and the support for agencies. And Nan was instrumental in helping create the Sphere Project. So that was one of the things. And I had the opportunity to work at National. And for a year, her office was like about 50 feet away from me. And I saw her walking in. And the other thing I have to share with you very shortly is what I was touched by was she walked her talk. Many people said, oh, yes, we believe we have to preserve the universe, preserve gas. She would be in a blizzard practically coming into work riding her bicycle. Everybody else came in by car or by taxi when it was really raining and storming. She would ride her bicycle. And I will never forget the image of her looking out. I was looking outside my window and seeing her coming in to work and locking her bicycle. So those are the little things. But she's an amazing woman who has done so much. And I'm just so grateful she made the time tonight. For her, it's nighttime. So thank her for being and be sensitive. She might be a little tired for coming today. And for all of you from all over the United States who showed up to say hi to Nan, thank you for that as well. So Nan, would you like to start? And I don't know if I introduced you correctly, but now Nan is the director of the Department of Innovations at the International Committee of Red Cross. When I met her, she was working for National Red Cross as the international director for field programs, and was amazing. So without any further ado, did I leave anything out? Should I add anything more?
I'm ready if you all are. Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're so welcome.
Hi, everybody. It's evening here in Switzerland. It's only a little after 9 p.m., but I usually get up at 5 to ride my bike to the office. So I tend to early, but I'm going to stay up and say hello to all of you. I wasn't expecting to see the faces of old friends. Stacey Reagan, actually, I will say something about her in my conversation later today. But what it made me realize just looking at all of you is that there is really something about going through disasters together that is so profound. The ways that we connect, the ways that we rely on each other, the horrible things we often witness, our joys and our tragedies really bind us closely together. So I was feeling pretty sad today, just kind of the state of the world and just feeling it's nonstop disasters. And now just seeing all of you, I feel cheered up, and I feel like I'm in a community of people who really care about the world and care about each other. So it's really lovely. So thank you very much for joining here, whether it's good morning or good afternoon or good evening to all of you. And Jill, a warm thank you for reaching out. I'm glad that we could put this together. So thank you. It feels really weird and grandiose and ridiculous to talk about my journey in the Red Cross. I only used that title because I was too tired to think of anything else. So I apologize for the cheesiness of it. And probably it's been used 1,000 times, but there it is. I'm really happy to reflect a bit on some of my kind of more personal moments as I got into international humanitarian work. Certainly share some thoughts and concerns about our kind of current life and challenges. Really excited to update you on the innovation work at the ICRC. There's some pretty cool stuff, and it keeps me young, and I feel really grateful for that. But I'm also hoping that I can hear from you. I really want us to have this be a conversation. I'm not here to lecture or pontificate. And if I am, definitely raise your hand and tell me to shut up. But I really want to hear how you all are handling a very complex world. I'm curious about the work with the fires. Very curious to see how you see disaster response changing, especially with climate change, as Jill was saying earlier. I'm curious about what's happening with volunteer forces, how they're being taken care of, what's happening with youth, or is that still an active part? Curious about the kinds of partnership that the ARC is trying to cultivate and why different kinds of partnership are coming on board. And most importantly, I think I'm curious about what kinds of futures do you anticipate? I've become really quite a futurist and think a lot about even times that I'm not going to be here on this planet, but how do we best kind of prepare ourselves? So particularly from a disaster response perspective, I'm curious about that. So I hope I don't talk for more than 15, 20 minutes and then really want to hear from all of you, because this is really about us as a community sharing. So part one, my childhood. Now, it's really, there's a childhood story, which is that I lived with my grandmother when I was quite young for quite a few years. And this was probably in the early 60s. And my grandmother was a nurse, and she was also a Red Cross volunteer in Westchester County, just outside of New York City. And one of my favorite photos of her is driving this big ass ambulance, this Red Cross ambulance, because she used to bring people back and forth from the hospital in Westchester who needed it. And she was very stern looking, and she had her nurse's cap on. And she was also someone who was a wonderful person in my life. And she said many things to me, but the things I want to share with you tonight is she said to me, always have your gas tank full, always have a first aid kit nearby, and when you're stressed out, breathe deeply. Now, this is pretty good, right? I mean, this is really someone who's got that Red Cross in her DNA. I'm sure if she was alive today, she'd have a go bag right by her bed. I mean, she was really a cutting edge Red Crosser. But it really, it stayed with me, that sense of service and that sense of working with others. And I think, like almost probably everyone on this call, service has been part of our lives, and we all do it in different ways. Sometimes it's just something local with your neighbor, and sometimes it's more national and you move across the United States to help each other with different responses. Sometimes it's international. For me, in New York City, which is where I spent a lot of my formative years from 17 on, I was cooking in soup kitchens. There's someone here on the call named Dorothy Day. It's not the Dorothy Day, but Dorothy Day was the founder of the Relief Catholic Workers, really a very progressive Catholic group. And they had this extraordinary homeless shelter in the East Village of New York City. And I worked there a lot as a cook and as a server. And I was very motivated, again, to kind of recognize that people are sometimes hit the skids, have had rough times happen to them, and how important it is to be able to have a warm meal and a friendly face. And obviously people need a lot more than that, but that was I thought a really good start. Like many of you, I also did things like supporting hotlines and working in community gardens, and all of it was about community and about service. Now, Jill said that I was supposed to talk about how did I really get into being an international humanitarian aid worker. I can't remember. I mean, I was in the private sector for a long time, and then I bought a house in Staten Island, which is a very interesting part of New York City, not like the rest of it. And as soon as I bought this house, I just thought, wow, there's so many people who don't have a house and don't have a home and don't have anything. And so I almost immediately left that house that I'd worked very hard to buy in the hills of Staten Island, looking out over Manhattan. And I went to a humanitarian NGO organization in New York City called the International Rescue Committee. And I begged them to let me come work for them. And they said, no, you didn't serve in the Peace Corps, you're private sector, we don't need any of that kind of workers with us. So going back, you do need someone who can think about spreadsheets and budgets and organizing and logistics. And eventually they capitulated. And I was actually quite old when I started my international humanitarian career. And I went to the Balkans, and I went to Sarajevo. And IRC was working in Yugoslavia, or the former Yugoslavia, during the war and the disintegration of Yugoslavia, and in Sarajevo, which is where I was based. And when I was there in Sarajevo in 1996 and 97, I realized that there was a huge international aid system, some of it good, some of it not so good. And I saw all kinds of NGOs, and I saw lots of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies from around the world who came to Yugoslavia, came to Sarajevo to work there. Sarajevo was also, I think, for any of us, like the first major crisis or disaster that you work in is really formative. It stays with you. Very particular lessons that you learn, very particular experiences that affect you. And the big thing that I recognized or took away in Yugoslavia was that it's how cities and how communities and how families can be destroyed and torn apart, certainly by conflict, but also by ideological differences. In Yugoslavia, it was called the narcissism of minor difference. And it's a really interesting concept. It was particularly intense in Yugoslavia, but I will go out on a limb here. I think you could also say that you see that in Northern Ireland, and you see it in Israel and Palestine. People who often share very similar cultures and DNAs, and yet have some of the most intense conflicts amongst them. So I think trying to understand why human beings, why we behave the way we do, is always something. So that was Sarajevo. I'm happy to go back to that time because it was very formative to me, but I'll just kind of continue on just to say what were some of the next steps. I was then in Sarajevo, we had a group of us working there, and I realized that everybody who was reporting to me had a master's degree, and I did not. I barely scraped through undergraduate. And when I could start taking my cat to class, everything improved enormously in New York City. But it was not, I'll tell you about that story later. But anyway, I decided to go to graduate school because everybody had a master's degree except me. And I did that, which was very nice. And after that, I actually was doing some academic research, and I went to Geneva to do some interviews. I was looking at how NGOs and the UN, the United Nations, did and did not coordinate in the refugee camps in Tanzania after the Rwanda genocide in 1994. And so part of my journey took me to Geneva, and I was in the building of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And there in one of the hallways, on a piece of paper with a thumbtack on a corkboard, do we ever see that anywhere anymore, was this job announcement for something called the Sphere Project, which Jill mentioned. And in short, it was a initiative of many Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, of many NGOs, to come together to develop a set of minimum standards in disaster response. Its origin is actually one that should concern us all, because the origin was substandard humanitarian action in refugee camps in the Congo. And I see Christina, and I'm sure others know some of the story here, but and I'd like to hear you guys think about this, because it's a real question about how professional do you need to be an aid worker, and what are the implications of if you're too professional, but what are the implications if you're not professional, and what does profession mean? But what happened there was that some of the practices were really wrong, particularly health practices around cholera, and very kind of 101 interventions were not followed, and people died. Now, there was a big report. It was 4 books long, and it was a multi-donor report on the failings of Rwanda. And it was diplomatic failings for the genocide. It was military failings, operational and humanitarian. And book 3, which was the humanitarian failures, was a real catalyst for the nonprofit NGO community to say, show that we can provide appropriate service to people. And at that time, in the mid to late 90s, in addition to the Sphere Project, other quality and accountability initiatives began. But I think what's interesting to note, and there were fierce debates about professionalism, standards, charity, what's good practice, what's a government's responsibility, what's independent humanitarian action, what kind of accountabilities need to be in place. What's interesting to me is these debates and these issues are not finished. They continue to this day. And it would be, again, interesting to hear from all of you, kind of how do you think about the profession of volunteerism or the profession of disaster response, and kind of what are the different levels of it, and what do we need, and is wanting to do good enough? I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves, and it's not an easy question to ask. That Sphere Project, they did hire me, and because I had a master's degree, so that really helped. And they did hire me, and it was based in Geneva, which is a lovely and strangely idyllic city in Switzerland, which houses all of these international humanitarian institutions and organizations: the International Committee of the Red Cross, MSF, the UN Refugee Agency. I mean, it's kind of crazy that this place that is like the most peaceful place in the world is this home of international humanitarian work. But I did love it. And working on the Sphere Project was deeply rewarding. And I wonder if something like that could happen again now, because what it was really thousands, not just hundreds, thousands of aid workers like yourselves who took off their institutional hat. They were no longer Oxfam or Save the Children or Doctors Without Borders. They were aid workers who brought their expertise to the table to say, what do we think are the best minimum standards in water, in shelter, in food, in health, and particular communities like the vulnerabilities of children or the elderly or people with disabilities were also taken into account, at least to a certain degree. It was a remarkable, I would say, kind of the best of crowdsourcing that ever happened, in my opinion, where you just had thousands of people putting in their best efforts and really agreeing what these minimum standards would be. By far, for I think in the United States, much lower than what the American Red Cross often provides. But still, it was a really an interesting endeavor. And it's still in action. It's been translated into over 45 languages, and it continues to be updated every few years. That was a great run. It was really interesting. I learned a ton. I will just say, around minimum standards, things that have more of a technical nature are much more easy to standardize. So a health intervention, which was much more easy to standardize than a mental health intervention, areas that still have a lot of maybe less so now, but have perhaps more cultural elements or are less technically clear. Though I think that's changing. Anyway, I'm moving into the American Red Cross. In 2005, I was happily living in Geneva, but I was headhunted, much to their dismay, once they got me into the international department. And I joined HQ in 2025 East Street. Is that right, Stacy? I think that's it. And it was just after Hurricane Katrina.
Yep, that's it.
Thank you. Perfect. And needless to say, the organization was completely flat out and freaked out. I mean, Katrina was, for many people and in many ways, an extraordinary time. Now, maybe it doesn't seem so much. Whatever, 1 million hot lunches in one day. I mean, I'm sure that the things that happened there now are not so out of the ordinary. There are a lot of stories from that time, but coming from Europe, I had heard that the French Red Cross had sent an emergency response team to Louisiana because they, like many of us in Europe, had seen just absolutely distressing images And people were shocked that this could even happen in the United States. People didn't know that that kind of poverty existed and that kind of disaster could hit the United States so intensely. I don't know all the details, and Stacey Reagan is the person to talk to about that particular moment in time. But I do know that it wasn't easy for the American Red Cross to have these strangers from France show up to kind of do emergency response. But I think what's really struck me was, wow, it feels really different when you're the receiver of other people. And that can be not just country to country, though that's pretty big, but even city to city or state to state. I'm curious kind of how that is working. You know, in some ways it's just extraordinary, this expression of we can help, we want to be there, but also kind of like, why are you in my country? Why are you in my community? I got this under control. So I think there's some really interesting things that really struck me in that. But again, talk to Stacey Reagan. I stayed at the American Red Cross in the international response or the international department for 7 years, and they were a roller coaster. And not just because I had to see Gail a lot. They were just a roller coaster because we had so many disasters, and ones that didn't always get on the big news, but were certainly part and parcel of ours. I was on a plane more often than not. I developed a habit that I still have today, which is I check emails constantly. And it's not that email connection, it's that disaster response concern. We relied on the 24-hour disaster monitoring that the doc provided. And we had hurricanes across the Caribbean constantly in hurricane season. We had earthquakes in Pakistan, in Indonesia, in Japan, and of course Haiti, which was a real tough one for everyone, primarily Haitians, who continue to suffer extraordinary political as well as natural disasters. And that one really, because of this huge Haitian American community, generated probably as much national attention as it would have been if it had happened on the mainland of the United States. So there were not just huge logistical and cultural issues, there was huge political concerns. If we have time, and if it's okay, I'll come back to a very funny story about Gail and Haiti. But right now, I'll just say that right now, at that point, I was working down in the IROC, which was the International Response Operations Center, which Stacey Reagan leads. And I had the privilege to have a desk that was right next to the doc, the Disaster Operations Center. And I often worked late in the night next to Becky McCory and Trevor Riggins when he was just a small boy. And it was so, they were just so wonderful, and we bonded so intensely. And it was so interesting to see the ways in which the domestic and international teams in some ways had so much in common and worked so well together. And in other ways, there were such significant differences and splits between us. And that's something that exists in many national societies that have national domestic response and international engagement. I think it's quite interesting. I'm going to pivot to my current work at the International Committee of the Red Cross. I think most of you know what the ICRC is, but if you don't, it's your father or your mother. It is the source of the Red Cross movement. It's the birthplace of the Red Cross. It was established in 1863 after the Battle of Solferino. I think you know all this, but if you don't, it's really an interesting story about how out of a war the Red Cross movement was born. And it is mandated by governments around the world to basically promote the rules of war, also known as the Geneva Conventions. The institution works in over 90 countries, and we provide assistance and protection. Really, we focus on the humanitarian principles, and I can say more about that, but it's a very distinctive element for us, very different than the United Nations. And for innovation, I would say the American Red Cross has been innovating for as long as it's been around, and certainly the ICRC has. Difficult circumstances demand creativity, demands risk-taking, and a lot has been accomplished over the decades. But a few years ago, the Director General of the ICRC was quite keen to bring in some structure and longer lasting impact from these different innovations that kind of were taking place across the institution. So he hired me, and to correct Jill, I am not the director of the Division of Innovation. I am the head of a small innovation facilitation team, which is a very different thing. We see innovation as a distributed responsibility. Everybody is capable of innovation. We are much more facilitators and nudgers and accelerators. We are not the doers of innovation. And for me, that's a really important distinction. We also act like, I'm not supposed to say this, but venture capitalists, because we invest. We have a small budget, and we invest into things that we think hold promise, but that don't fit into everyday budgets or operations. So it's a very privileged position to be in such an important organization. I'm going to just go a little bit further into innovation, because I've really become a total innovation junkie. I think it's great. I think innovation it's one of those words like coordination. It means whatever you want it to mean to whoever's speaking about it. It's not so easy, but we really see it fundamentally as something that serves a couple of purposes. So one is what I would call incremental improvements. And I'm going to give you an example. In South Africa, during this coronavirus, this COVID-19, a lot of people have died. And so our forensics, which we have a team of forensics around the world, people who work on basically restoring family links through forensics work, but they also help people with the management of dead bodies. And they were being overwhelmed in South Africa with calls from municipalities, local authorities who did not know what to do. With the bodies containing the virus? I mean, a whole set of questions. So we created a chat bot with them that could more quickly answer at least a certain degree of first questions. So it's not rocket science, but it was a small improvement that really helped some efficiency and some speedier answers. And sometimes in innovation, we test new solutions that we're not sure is going to work. So something that we've worked on for the past 2 years is mounting infrared cameras on drones to take footage, not of war zones, but of agricultural monitoring, or if we're preparing to put in some water systems, or looking for mine detection. And then we take that camera footage and we put it through machine learning so that we can much more efficiently and much more quickly monitor and analyze situations. So this is the kind of exciting stuff. It's not that other people aren't doing it, but it's very cool to be doing it in an organization that really then picks up and applies it across multiple domains that we work on. We had an historical challenge. The ICRC has 23 linear kilometers. That's like 15 miles, 14 miles, around that. A lot of miles. Linear miles of archives from World War II. These are handwritten notes from prisoners from country to country. It's newspaper documents. It's an enormous amount of information. We're testing handwriting software to see it's a software to see if it can recognize handwritten notes, so that we can further and faster digitalize all of these archives to make them available to people who are still searching for missing family members, or just want to have more history of family members that they knew were lost or killed in the war. So in our beginning at innovation team, in my small team, we really kind of did everything. It was pretty chaotic, and we thought, everything goes. But we've, over the years, focused on a couple of things that have really made a difference. One, we've started to do portfolios, and this is just the idea. Think of any kind of portfolio of stocks in, I don't know, environment or in high tech. But basically you put thematics together where you look to gather and link different initiatives into one thing. So one of our portfolios is modern and future war, which forensics would go into, or new weapons of destruction would go into, thinking about research, testing new kinds of technology. Another of our thematics is the environment and conflict. We're seeing more and more people affected by environmental changes, leading to more and more conflict. So of course, being a good American, I have the X-Files, which we keep for things that don't fit into any of the thematics, but we know are important and need to be paid attention to. I'm really proud that about 70% of the innovation initiatives that we invest in are then picked up and put into strategies and into practice throughout the organization. Though my bosses said, well, maybe we're not failing enough, so you can't win, but no. So we also apply innovation to larger, harder kind of nuts to crack. And certainly the environment and our own carbon footprint has been a big one. So a long-term challenge team, we call them challenge teams, that we've put together was really to improve safe, reliant, renewable energy for our operations as well as for our infrastructure. We have over 2,500 premises spread across 500 sites in 115 countries. I would love to know ARC's footprint of warehouses and offices. It would be very interesting to know. And we felt that with that kind of footprint, it necessitated that we know that we had very varied energy consumption, but that some were more than others and that we relied far too heavily on generators and diesel. So we've been greening over the past few years our premises. Pretty excited about the building blocks that we've invested in. A critical step was measuring the emissions we produce, whether directly or indirectly through our suppliers. So our supply chain is pretty big, as is the ARC's. And we now know the emission to every single liter of fuel, every saucepan, every prosthetic limb, every kilo of rice. So we can know where we have huge emissions and where we can negotiate with suppliers or change suppliers to have a lower carbon footprint overall. We're developing new partnerships, including new financing models. And we're looking to, well, I could go on and on about this subject because it's really quite dear to my heart. But what's exciting to me is that we've taken it so seriously. We've put together a bunch of building blocks and we have really advanced on our ability and our infrastructure to have an energy transition and transformation. I could say a whole lot more about it. I'm gonna leave it because I feel like I'm just rattling on. But I will say that we see, as I said earlier, the increasing conflict because of environmental degradation and people moving or fighting over diminished resources, whether that's grazing land in Africa or perhaps soon water in Western United States. So I think you really have to keep an eye on kind of the implications of changes in our environment. I'm curious in our conversation when I finish very shortly to hear what's happening with the ARC around some of these kinds of issues. So obviously innovation and technology are closely linked. I think at the ARC, it's all about digitalization. That's fine. I don't think it's really all of innovation, but it's a powerful one. I want to talk about a different kind of technology called virtual reality. In virtual reality, we had a small unit at the ICRC with a former Swiss military guy who was a big gamer. And while we know it cannot replace and should not replace face-to-face trainings, we realize that it's an incredibly powerful force. Virtual environments, for any of you who have kids or gamers yourselves, know that it's very powerful to be in a virtual environment, but the science and the academic research also shows that it helps tremendously with knowledge retention and it can steer behaviors. And that's what we're interested in. So what we focused on is creating an urban conflict virtual environment that we use and bring to the militaries that we teach international humanitarian law to. It's really powerful. It's still in embryonic stage. We just have a few militaries that are using it. The American military is a little advanced, so they're not going to really care about our little homemade urban environment. But a lot of militaries find this very interesting and very attractive. And to me, it's also not only important from a training and behavior influencing point of view, it's important to also stay current, to not feel like we're rocking up with a dusty old PowerPoint, but that we really are understanding that the world is changing and we need to be able to represent different kinds. So very excited about that. We may even explore an IHL dissemination game that can be used for IHL teaching in high schools and colleges. So I think there's real opportunities. A lot of young people are gamers. They spend a lot of time. I'm not saying it's great to be online all the time, but we also have to recognize that this is how people learn and entertain, and we need to have a place in that space. I feel like I'm just talking at you all. I do have a few more things to say, but I'm a little bit like, should I stop for a minute? Hear how you're doing?
Just take a deep breath and go on, because so far it's really exciting to hear what you're talking about. Anybody else want to pipe in? Do you want her to stop, or do you want her to go on?
Or some question.
Quiet and listening. Yeah. Somebody has a question in the chat. We love it so far, they say.
Shelley, I love you too.
Keep going.
Okay,
Yes,
cool. Thank you. That's very kind of you. I really appreciate it.
And so said I could listen to you all day. They don't realize for you that's night. I don't think it's fair to make you stay all day.
Very kind. It's really, really kind. Well, I think right back at all of you. Let me stay on technology just for a bit, because I think we're all grappling with it in our lives, personally as well as professionally. We're struggling at the ICRC with digitalization. And I'm not talking about digitizing, our records or et cetera. I'm talking about how active and reliant we are on digital technologies that we don't own or control, and that we are not just a bystander to this technology, but that we are fully fledged stakeholders in cyberspace. And as thus, we are also vulnerable to adverse cyber operations that could impact on individuals' privacy and safety, but just overall our capacity to provide protection and assistance. We're really involved in this. We think a lot about digitalization and data issues. We're exploring digital protection with academic institutions. We are looking at biometrics and how to have biometrics that aren't traceable, biometrics that can't be taken. I mean, I think you've all followed this extraordinary story in Afghanistan about the biometrics being used by the UN and the US military and other militaries there, that then was, I don't think, I'm not an expert in this subject, but it seems like there was not preparedness for, if you could not hold on to that information, who might get it, and then the kind of number of data points on individuals that were held by military contractors, the UN, and different governments who were active in Afghanistan, putting hundreds, thousands of Afghans at risk. And their families. So this is not just something that's happening to someone else, it's happening to us. So I guess I would encourage all of you to know that kind of digital dilemmas are not something that's happening out there. It's happening right here. And we all need to wrap our heads around this and how they can be used for wrong purposes. We've published a handbook on data protection and humanitarian action. It was written by some lawyers, so it's a little bit big and a little heavy, but it's got some really important information in it. And I would encourage you, it's online, to take a look at it. I think I'm just going to mention two more things. COVID-19, coronavirus. How can I not speak about this? Maybe I'll just say three things. One, ICRC, like all of us, kind of had to stop on a dime. And we were extremely fortunate to have great staff around the world who worked right through the whole thing. Yes, there is a link to that that data protection and humanitarian action handbook. It's really big, but it's really interesting, and you should be able to look at it online as well as download it. It's a little bit technical, but it's interesting. It covers all sorts of technologies, and how do you think about data protection across multiple kinds of technologies. It's a good piece of work. On COVID, our operations continued. There were obviously issues around detention visits, certain kinds of assistance and protection activities, but people did great. it's gotten much harder now in some ways because there just doesn't seem to be a real end. Wow, that was fast. Somebody's really good. Nikki, like it. Want a job? No. But certainly innovations can help with certain COVID issues like the chat bot. We've done some other apps related to kind of water purification and hospitals. I mean, lots of little things, but it's not, we've not really been able to crack that nut. I mean, lots of people, and I'm curious to hear for the ARC, how are you handling training? How are you handling people moving across country? I'm not even going to ask you how you're handling about should you have a vaccine certificate or not. But here in Europe and most of the world, you can't get on a plane without one. So it's mandatory for our staff who travel. But I think one thing that's interesting, and this will lead me into my last point here. I don't know for those of you who read it, but Foreign Affairs, which is a magazine that comes out kind of I guess it's a magazine, a journal, Foreign Affairs, just had a recent article that proposes the creation of a new international organization. Good luck with that. But that would be dedicated solely to future pandemics. Now, I think what they were really trying to think about is how to have financing for a truly global response. I don't think that will happen, but I do think we're going to see whether it's through governments like the CDC in the United States or WHO here in Geneva. I do think we're going to see and should see far more attention to preparedness for pandemics, not just for the pandemics themselves, but for supply chains that get cut, for water that gets contaminated, a whole set of things that will come rocking up to national society's doors. Which is not just the health elements of it, as well as the health elements of it, which will lead me to my last point, which is strategic futures. I hope that some of you are involved with strategic futures. Yes, it sounds like jargon. Yes, it can really be a bit silly. But I will give you a quote, which I bet all of you know of, whether you liked the man or not. There are known unknowns and there are unknown unknowns. Gold star for no, whoever gets that. What that really says to me is we can know a lot more than we do if we could apply ourselves better. I don't know if how many of you know this, but many governments, many private sector companies, many think tanks, and especially many militaries have future or foresight teams embedded in them. The Canadian government has 20. How many does the American government have? I don't know, but I think this is quite interesting. These are people that are dedicated with very particular methodologies to try to think about what are the trends, but not only what are the trends. I mean, clearly climate is a big one, or population growth, or, I mean, you could look at any kind of trend, but what does it mean? What are the implications to your work? What are the implications to your community? This guy I worked with a bit says, there's the what, there's the so what, but the hardest thing is the now what. What are we actually doing in our planning that actually gets us potentially in a better position for the future? Even long futures, 10, 15, 20, even 30 years out. This is very difficult for disaster responders. Trust me, I know. That's not how we think. It's not how we act. But it's really, I think, a crucial ingredient that's missing from most of our organizations. ICRC, led by my small team, is really seeking to use strategic foresight far more robustly, whether it's about it could be anything, the state of forensics, the state of prosthetics, the state of political movements, populism, access, conflict. You can pick any subject. It doesn't really matter. It's really about trying to understand its full implications, but more importantly, making sense of it for your organization and institution. So that's where we're putting a lot of our effort and in to be more rigorous and connect across our organization, not just do it by individual teams. Let me end there. now. I really would like to, I've asked you a million questions. Have you been keeping track? I want to know how the ARC is doing on all those things that I mentioned. But I just really mostly want to say thank you so much for joining this conversation, and look forward to hearing from all of you. Jill, over to you.
Before you even start, I have a question for you. Because you said,
Jill, the moderator doesn't get to ask the first question, darling.
I have one question, just one question. I'm dying to know your funny story about Gail.
I don't, Stacy, do you think I could say it? Stacy Reagan. Christina says I can say it. Okay. So the American Red Cross is a leader in cash distributions, right? Way before this became kind of an international humanitarian phenomenon, and a good one. The American Red Cross recognized that I don't know if you call it cash. I mean, we called it, what did we call it at the ARC? Where people would get like vouchers or credit cards, like short-term credit cards that had a certain.
Was it cash?
Financial assistance.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And the American Red Cross has been doing this for decades. I mean, it's very impressive. Hi, Mark. That was so nice. And so we were going to do it in Haiti. It made perfect sense, right? It's like, let people decide if they want to get food from the market, if they want to try to rent a place, it's about dignity, it's about efficiency. I mean, the arguments are very clear. But I think during Katrina, something like less than 1% of the cash distributions resulted in people buying a television set or buying alcohol. And so there was some concern in the leadership that this would happen in Haiti. And Gail said, if I had just been through that earthquake, I would want to drink. And I just love that, because I thought, so it's not such a bad thing. It was just so practical. It was so, I don't know, so passionate and compassionate about what people are going through. And okay, yeah, maybe we have some risk. Maybe we'll take some reputational hit. And yeah, let's do this because it's the right thing to do.
Wonderful.
That wasn't so bad.
Thank you. Okay, now I'll be back to being a moderator. Thanks very much, Nan. Please unmute yourself and ask questions, or if you're shy, ask questions in the chat. Nan is totally open to any questions. And don't all jump at once. I know it's hard. But also you might have your microphone on, as I often do. I have it off and I keep on talking. So unmute your microphone and ask a question to Nan.
Come on, Christina, say hi at least. Do I live on a boat on Lake Geneva?
That's what I want to know.
I'm here. It took me a while to finally click into the meeting.
Should I answer?
So, yeah. There's a question for you. Do you live on a boat in Geneva?
My dear friend Christina is asking that because when I lived in Washington, D.C., I lived on a houseboat for 7 years down in Southwest in the Potomac. I was next door to the chief of staff for the Pentagon chief, the head Marine in the Pentagon. His chief of staff had the boat next to me, so we became buddies. No, unfortunately, there are no houseboats allowed on Lake Geneva. It's a very clean lake, unlike the Potomac River, and there are no houseboats. So I rent a tiny apartment. I'm in my bedroom right now on a beautiful old farm on the lakes of Geneva. And Christina, it's great to see you.
And
just wonderful.
The next question was, what were some of your questions, Nan? I didn't write them down, but before that, let's see. One question has to do with the footprint of ARC, economic impact, etc., and mitigation forward thinking. Right. One question had to do with the footprint of ARC. What were some of your questions, Nan, that are really important that you want to answer to?
Wow. So yes, I was interested in kind of for all of the warehouses, et cetera. Your supply chain management, is that something that's being looked at now? That's something that more and more companies and organizations are looking at. So I'm curious where the ARC is in that. I was curious about how you all are thinking about preparedness, whether you, I mean, I call it climate change, but you are seeing a remarkable intensity and volume of disasters. How are you preparing for it? How do you train? How are you engaging with volunteers, and how are you training people during COVID when there is less face-to-face ability? How are you finding people getting along in a relatively, I mean, if you read about the United States, pretty polarized. I'm curious, how are volunteers able to kind of not go there, be together? I mean, you know, how are you dealing with something that, at least from out here, looks to be fractured and powerful? Those are a few things that are on my mind.
I think Omar was on the call. I don't know if he still is. I know Pablo Suarez is, and Pablo works with he's a
I know
technical
Pablo very
advisor.
well. Yes,
Oh, you do? Okay. Do you guys collaborate together?
we do, and I can always have much more of it. And we actually have a call next week to talk about all of his wonderful ways of helping people deal with and think about and manage very hard conversations about climate.
Wonderful. And Omar is part of the international program. I don't know if he's still on the call, but he was instrumental, at least for us. He started with the international bilateral programs, figuring out what to do with the increased effects of climate change. And we invited him to one of these talks, Nan. And so we started the first pilot program in the United States on climate change adaptation. And as such, we're reaching out to partners to see how we can best prepare them and lessen the impacts. For instance, in Santa Cruz County, the people who are dealing with the wetlands overflowing and the flooding, instead of once every 4 years, every single year, we're partnering with them to help potentially pre-position supplies for the constituents, so that they can clean out the gutters and that have overflows, so that they can clean once and avoid mold once it sets in. So we've started doing that on a very, very basic grassroots level. Nationally, they've hired Noel Anderson, and they just hired somebody else to work on fundraising and strategic planning. They've divided the groups into small groups in Pacific Division and in regionally to brainstorm things to do in terms of, in fact, I'm on a 5-year strategic planning committee for international services and SAF. So they're starting to. One of my volunteers said, we're dinosaurs, and you'll forgive me for saying this, we're dinosaurs with fast feet. We're trying to catch up because what's acute has become chronic, you know, in terms of nationally, in terms of disasters. We dealt with ice storms, we dealt with heat waves, we dealt with fires, we dealt with overflooding and during the hurricane. It's constant, and it's not with a respite. So one of the challenges I think we have nationally is for not burning out our volunteers. And it's particularly difficult when we're doing combined virtual and boots on the ground. And I think that's the biggest challenge for the United States. I can't speak for everybody, but that's the way I perceive it. I'd love to hear from the rest of people and what they think about that.
Nikki, do you have your hand up, as well as responding to Jill's point about volunteer burnout?
I do. I have my hand up with kind of a question. Sorry, I have my big headphones on. But you'd mentioned about youth earlier, Nan, and I think that that's really a great kind of area to explore. And I think COVID has kind of, in some ways, been a bit of a blessing with how we work with our youth, right? They are so confident and so comfortable in the digital world. You know, they're doing amazing things with our youth action campaign. We have a really strong youth program around missing maps as well. Our youth do monthly mapathons here. And I just kind of am interested, you know, sort of about your thoughts on innovation with youth, how to bring those youth in and how to help them innovate, how to help, you know, they're clearly the future, and how to within the constraints of what it is that we do, how to support those youth with their great ideas and listen to them and help them. So any thoughts on that would be really great.
Maybe we can also have a quick bilateral on that, but
Of course.
in short, I mean, the first thing is just to start listening. You know, people like to be heard, and I think that does not find ways to engage and incorporate and honor and utilize youth isn't going to make it. So I can't agree with you enough. But finding ways to channel, connect, engage isn't so straightforward. And I mean, part of it is the American press will probably have to be a lot more willing to be digitally far more savvy. And that's not a safe space to be in, but it's a necessary space to be in. But I don't know kind of where things are now. But I love the youth campaign idea. I think that's great. And you might not keep them. I think it's going to be probably different than the volunteers that have stayed with the American Red Cross for 10 and 20 and 30 years. They may stay for 2 or 3 months. And that's okay. I mean, part of it is also being an organization that can, and it's not easily take on board, enjoy, and then they go. And that's okay.
I wanted to share with you. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jill.
No, go ahead, Nikki. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I love when you ask these questions and people jump in the chat. And so Shelley and Stilius, I'll reach out to you. We can talk about it. It's fantastic. I love these collaborations.
Great. That's great. Super.
The other thing is they had a question for you. Have you worked with the UK innovation team? We've had initial conversations with them, but they pivoted to COVID work. And that's from Dutro.
Let me I didn't quite hear it. The UK innovation team.
Have you worked with the UK innovation team? Dutro has had an initial contact conversation with them, but they pivoted to COVID work.
Stan, I'm not sure which innovation team you mean, because there's quite a lot. Did you mean the British Red Cross? Do you mean the UK government?
Yeah, the British Red Cross.
Yep. I have had some engagements with them, not a huge amount. It's interesting.
Here.
I guess, of course, they pivoted to COVID. But Stan, I think you wrote the one that you would like to see a little bit more digital savviness in your area. Well,
yes.
I'm sure that you can make that happen.
Well, we are making it happen.
What's holding you back? Okay.
Well, quite honestly, national IT.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So we have ideas we want to implement. Thing. Yeah. So probably a good offline discussion.
Yeah. But I will say but it's really interesting. I think national headquarters, whatever you want to call it, IT, have such a heavy burden of trying to just keep like the regular applications and the regular kind of platforms behaving, that their bandwidth to kind of do, this is what we struggle with too. And that's why we've really focused a lot on kind of where do you put your research and development and innovative stuff, and how do you hand it off or get it embedded into ongoing technical support? I'd love to have a talk with you separately, because it's not an easy piece, but there are maybe some tricks that we've learned that have helped us steer it a little bit better.
Okay, I will set up a time, because we, as Nikki and others from the NorCal region know, we've been working on this actually for 4 years now. We've made this amount of progress, and there's this amount of opportunity. So, we're slowly getting there, but, it's hard to get space to even do trials. So, I'd love to get your...
by the time you get there, it's going to be obsolete anyway.
Yeah. So, I'll set up something with you. That would be great to learn from your experience.
Or at least listen to you.
And then Art Stein had a question. And he has chronic disasters. I don't know what the question is about, Art.
Well, it really wasn't a question. It's just how we're referring to it now. We don't get a break. That's all. It's just one to the next and keeps going. That's all. Just a comment on what you were saying, man.
What do you, I mean, I couldn't agree more. What do you think is going to happen?
We have to regroup, and we're figuring it out as we go, like we've been doing. I'm not in disaster services per se. I'm just watching and raise money for it. But I know we're doing things that we can to stay ahead of the game and try as much as one can. I'll let others.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, Art, just a quick aside, one of my concerns about that, obviously, then the big picture is, you know, in the recent past, you know, we talked blue sky, gray sky. You know, quite honestly, because of the quote unquote business model of the Red Cross, you know, most of the work that I'm doing around digital transformation needs the staff involvement. But during gray skies, they're, you know, rightfully, they pivot to the disaster. Now, with this chronic situation, you know, I worry that I'm not going to get any bandwidth of the staff to be able to make change because we'll be constantly just, you know, responding to disasters. So we've got to figure out how do we do both, because we both need to serve our mission as well as improve how and what we do. So we're going to need to get even more creative.
Yep.
Exactly.
There's someone with their hand up. I think it's Scott. Sarah Scott.
Actually, Scott's my last name. Stillisa is my first name.
But, oh, good. Thank you. All I see because it's Scott. My bad. Sorry, dear.
No worries. Actually, I'm just going back a little bit, and maybe this is too basic of a response. The question about the Youth Action Campaign, that's sort of under my umbrella. I'm new as the lead for this region or anywhere. So I'm taking on duties as they come up. I'm going to be creating my own gaggle of whatever youth gaggle, perhaps, of youngsters to make a youth campaign. And I just saw a program through ICRC where a professor, I forget the university, taught IHL through Star Wars. Apparently that he did this 30 years ago when it was all the rage, and apparently Trekkies to this day are so anchored to it that all of the various generations of Star Wars have these analogies. So I asked my daughter, who's 19, at Lewis and Clark, I said, do you think that something like that, but letting the kids pick, I don't know, what Harry Potter, I have no idea what programs they might find it useful to apply it to. And our goal is to get 500 contacts per campaign per youth group. And if they do that right and they get a virtual video night, so I don't know, the person who asked the question, maybe you already knew that and that was too basic, but I was really inspired by that. As an adult, I enjoyed the hell out of it. You know, when Captain Kirk did this, you know, do you think that violated that of the IHL? So that's something that when I get my group together, I'm going to posit to them as possibly a way to engage with the public on a bigger scale that they can maybe sink their teeth into. So I just wanted to share that idea because I thought it was pretty cool. And more importantly, I got the 19-year-old daughter stamp of approval, which as a mom, we all know is gold.
Nikki
I
mentioned,
think it's great. Go ahead, Nikki.
Actually, he actually reported that also, so you can watch it if anybody's interested, and then extrapolate from there. But that's all.
Oops. And I think Nikki mentioned that Hunger Games and something else. I just lost it. That Hunger Games and other national YAC team provides wonderful resources. Harry Potter. That was the other one.
So I guess it depends on the age of the kids. Basically letting them choose kind of whatever it is that particular group of folks are into that year. But yeah, I watched the one that it escapes me. It was just last week. I can't remember who did it, but it's easily found in the resource section under the connection. Yeah, so I'm gonna try that out this
I think
year.
it's brilliant.
I did too.
Absolutely. I know that the Australian Red Cross did something. I think it was with Star Wars, not Star Trek, or the Hunger Games, but absolutely, it's so creative and it reaches people in ways that no amount of blah blah will. So I would definitely. I'm just trying to think who would have that information. I can ask
I have it.
someone at the ICRC. But do you have the Australia? And I think the Australian and the British Red Cross for sure have done this, but I think other national societies as well.
No, I can look up the link of the program I just saw last week.
Okay.
In chat.
Perfect. Great.
But I would also really love to see the other ones as well, so that if I present it to the group and they choose to do it, they have a lot of resources to look at as well.
Great.
And also, I think, oh, Pablo, were you going to say something, or you're just saying hi?
I just came back from a meeting that derailed me, so I wanted to signal that I'm back. Apologies for having to step out.
I was asking before if there was a collaboration between the two of you, and she said, "Oh yes, absolutely." Pablo's part of the.
Never enough.
Yeah, exactly. He's part of the technical. He's a technical advisor for the Climate Change Center for the International Federation, and he's going to be talking to us in November. The other thing I think Christina put, and I wasn't quite clear what she put in the chat, but she said falling sky. Would you be willing to clarify what falling sky means, Christina?
Oh, I was just sort of joking because we talk about blue sky and gray sky, and it feels more like it's a falling sky, and we're all sort of Chicken Little right now. And trying to find a sense of optimism and a sense of looking to the future. And I guess I like to try to think about how at the end of all this, one of my personal statements that guides what I do is, nature wins. And whether we want to continue to be, as a human race, part of the nature that is going to be here in a generation or 10 generations, it's a choice that we have. But to not get so overwhelmed with feeling like we've already failed, to think, nature is going to go on, but how do we find our part of what we're doing to try to make things better for humanity? And I think, as Nan alluded to earlier, we all find that place that we can fit in, and whether it's helping your neighbor or across the street or across the world, we do what we can do. And we have to remember that even though it feels like the sky is falling all the time, that we do have some control, and we can have a sense of optimism, and joining chats and groups like this to realize that we are all together in this disaster response tribe, and trying to help each other is a great way to do that, and to keep us all focused on what we can do and being optimistic for the future. So that's sort of what that meant.
Thank you, Christina.
Christina, you have to go on to Pablo's links that he sent you. I think you'll find it very comforting.
Thank you.
And also, Pablo, if you would put in the chat your TED Talk, that would be fantastic. On humor and humanitarian response, I love it. And also, Dee Dee, you had your hand up.
Yeah,
I can see. Yeah,
birthday.
go ahead.
And I was thinking that one of our problems with this constant, falling skies, is the retention of volunteers, and technology has a lot to do that, because they've suddenly created all of us to be much more virtual, but they haven't given any greater support to virtual workers who I sit in my basement for 18 hours a day finding hotel rooms for clients. But, when I call up and say, I've been on the job for 10 days and I know I'm allowed as a virtual worker $50, can I have it, please? The paid staff sort of yells at the volunteer who's talking to me. So I'm not being yelled at. Don't do that. That's not a thing. And so, my people in my staffing people then have to turn and educate them. But there's, I need for you guys have created huge spreadsheets to, deal with 4,000 clients, and you want to know which room each one of them is in. But, after a year of asking, I get a loaner with a 10-inch screen.
Wow.
So there's this need to really make a big and wonderful deal of virtual work. Folks who are who work for the Red Cross and work 60 hours a week or more, staying home is a lovely thing. To be a volunteer, most of what we get out of that is the interaction with people. So to be virtual is a hardship, and we should get more warm fuzzies for it. So that's a piece of it. And the other piece is, when we get really good techie people as volunteers, they take one look at our techie stuff and go find another organization. It's like, I don't have to put up with this crap. Bye. It's kind of, I'm kind of, what do you call it? Amateur-y techie. When I was 15, I was soldering bits of AI together, but I'm not a techie, I'm a nurse. So I don't have the new skills of, programming in R and making the spreadsheets sing. I can just make spreadsheets do their job. But so we really do need to give virtual people who are not total introverts much more warm fuzzies for being, stepping up and being there. Just that joy when we got back into the office for a day or two was just amazing to see. But yeah, so we do need to switch some sort of, if you deploy, you get all these, we got a pin for deploying to our last year's wildfire. If you're there in person, you got a thick gold rim, and if you were there on a computer, you got a thin gold rim. So it's sort of second-class citizenship that I'm not happy with, but I would love to see. Anyway, I'm one of the people who sort of keep dreaming and complaining anyway. That's my role, is to complain and say, but there's a better way, I'm sure.
You're bringing it out to us, which is so important, because then it's in the consciousness of the people that are listening today. So that's very invaluable to share, I think.
I try.
Please go ahead, Nan. I'm sorry.
I wish I had better responses. I find this very moving and troubling.
One of the questions that, and thank you for contributing that, and Dee Dee, I'm sorry, all I can see is D-Day. And that's my problem with your name, but thank you for responding.
Sure.
And there's one other question in the chat. Nan, after sharing your journey with Red Cross, what advice do you have for those just starting their Red Cross journey?
I think it's my bedtime.
Oh dear. You have 14 minutes.
No,
left.
I mean,
Oh,
that's
dear.
a hard, it's hard
Stop
to know
sharing.
what to say. Celeste, I think it's such a personal journey for everyone in their life. I think that we all find different ways to serve. Depends kind of what work you want to do and what your ambitions are. When I did finally go to graduate school, we had the dean of the divinity school give our kind of like congratulating the class. I wasn't in the divinity school, I was in another school, but he said, many of you will seek jobs, some of you will have careers, and the lucky ones will have vocations. And by vocations, he meant you find something that really moves you. So to me, it's less about a Red Cross journey and for you to find the things that really matter and move you, whatever they may be. And that's what you dedicate yourself to be in it, to be around it, to serve it, to work in it, whatever that might look like. I would say search for your vocation, and maybe you have a job and a vocation, and also read a great book called Range, R-A-N-G-E, for the generalists among us, and I'm one of them. It's a great book. Have we come to a conclusion?
We're all looking up Range on the computer.
I think we're good, Jill, unless there's anything pressing. I would say.
I'm sorry. There's one other thing that somebody wrote. Oh, they put down the Amazon Generalist Range, the Range book for you.
Nikki, you are.
She's amazing, isn't she?
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. I'm so lucky to have her as a boss. And
really.
In any case, and you can't steal her away. We want her here.
Fair enough.
In any case, anything else that you want to say to Nan before she gets to go home and go to bed? I mean, she probably is at home, but now she gets to go to sleep for the rest of the. Oh, there's one more in here. It was so great to see you, Nan. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I miss you, says Ellen Kurtz. She sends her love. Thank you. And one other question after that, and one hand up. So wonderful to see you share with us. Tears in my eyes to see you again, and joy in my heart, knowing the good works you've continuing to do. And then Pablo Suarez says, quick question for Nan, if time allows. What is the role of inter-organizational tensions, conflicts in creating and enabling innovation? Tough question.
I don't even understand the question, Pablo. You're using words that are too big for my vocabulary.
Okay, for the pre-NAP Nan, it is my impression that you have been exceptionally savvy in bringing innovation through the cracks of very rigid structures. I used to be a civil engineer. When a very rigid structure is no longer fit for its place, it begins to crack. And when the fissure happens, some light goes through, Nan goes in and creates change. It seems like you have become an expert in identifying where some things don't fit together so that you create newness, whether it's operational at international or ICRC. And I wonder whether you intentionally read that, or if it's a delusion on my head, or how do you see internal, changes, disagreements, etc., as opportunities for innovation? Sorry for excessive verbosity.
No, thank you, Pablo. I hope that I can do that. And that's kind of what I meant with Stan, which is kind of to try to understand why is the ARC's national IT people so conservative? They have their reasons. So it's really trying to understand where people, it's a negotiation. Pablo, you know this. Where are people coming from? Why are they conservative? They're not just doing it to make Stan crazy and waste his time, but he is going crazy and he is wasting his time. So there's a dilemma there. So I think it's really trying to kind of find that crack. I mean, I don't know, but we have that with IT too, and we've tried to find a way to have a little research team that some of the IT people are part of, and that we have a service level agreement where we pay them to pilot and test things. But they're all, so I think there's ways to find people where they're at and have them become part of that journey. I think that's the biggest thing, is it's not your innovator journey, it's finding the innovator or the creative person in them, which is what you do so beautifully, Pablo, which is why we're going to have a long talk next week. Love ya.
I'm going to part with I just now want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. It is so good to see you again. And to say there's a Leonard Cohen poem. That's where there's a crack in everything. He says there's a crack in everything. That's how the light comes in. And I basically think all of us have to look for those cracks. And I think you and Pablo are perfect examples of leaders who do that. And I just really, truly thank you so much for being here today. And
Jill, thank you.
One more.
Shout
one
out
more
to
thing. Pablo wants
Harold.
to connect. I'm sorry.
I was just giving a shout out to Harold.
Absolutely, you saw him. He came in late, and he just couldn't get in. So I was trying to help him get in. Oh, I'm so glad you saw Harold. And I'm going to just read to you a couple of things. Thank you for this. I'm only a month into my journey with American Red Cross. I'm a student in college, graduate this year. Thank you so much for doing this. I learned so much. Thank you for everything. And somebody else, thank you for taking the time, Nan. And thank you. Lots of thank yous in the chat for you.
Well, my thanks to
I'm
all
going to
of
leave you
you.
with the thank yous.
Well, thank you, but I'm going to leave you with a thank you to all of you for your work. I really mean it. Think about how you're going to handle all these things. Conservative institutions, raging climate change, burnt out volunteers, lack of recognition for people who work as volunteers in virtual space. These are real, and they're not going to go away, and they're going to get bigger. So have faith that you need to face them, and wishing you all the best in trying to solve and mitigate them. Goodbye, everybody. Big hugs, and see you on campus.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye, Nan.
Bye.
Bye, Nan.